In the last presentation, we looked at Protestant Reformation, and we saw how in Europe, Protestantism broke the power of the papacy. As that power was being broken, we saw that freedom was being instituted in many places by different people, because that's what the gospel brings. The true gospel brings freedom. Today we will continue that story, but we will look at another place, another continent, which is America. So, when first constrained to separate from the English Church, the Puritans had joined themselves together by a solemn covenant as the Lord's free people, to walk together in all His ways made known or to be made known to them. Here was the true spirit of reform, the vital principle of Protestantism. It was with this purpose that the Pilgrims departed from Holland to find a home in the New World. This is from Great Controversy. It's talking about the spirit of reform, the true spirit of reform. And it says to follow God, or to walk together in every way that God makes known to us. That means God makes known the way to the individual, and the individual follows that way. It's not that God makes known the way to the individual, but to somebody else, and the somebody else is the conscience of the individual. But actually, God will speak to us through His Word and through His Spirit. And He will show us what to do personally. We must have an individual connection to God. So, their journey started on 1620. In 1620, the Pilgrim Fathers left England for America in the Mayflower. Inside that ship, they made a compact or covenant to create a new political body. And did you know that there was one baby born in that ship? Just one? And it was like the symbol of freedom, because they were on their journey to freedom. And that baby was called Peregrine White. The compact they made says, having undertaken for the glory of God and advancement of the Christian faith and the honor of our King and country, a voyage to plant the first colony in the northern parts of Virginia, do by these presents solemnly and mutually in the presence of God and of one another covenant and combine ourselves together into a civil body politic for our better ordering and preservation and furtherance of the ends aforesaid. This they wrote inside the ship. It was a compact, so they were creating a new political body. This is some very interesting point. This is one very interesting point. James White, on his book Life Incidents, talks about his genealogy. And the way he describes it is as follows. My father descended from one of the pilgrims who came to America in the ship Mayflower and landed upon Plymouth Rock, December 1620. On board that ship was the father of Peregrine White, who wore a pair of silver knee buckles, such as may be seen in the picture of the venerable signers of the Declaration of Independence. The knee buckles worn by this man were afterward given to his son, Peregrine White, who was born on the passage to this country, with the request that they should be handed down in this line of the White family to the eldest son of each successive generation, whose name should be called John. My father had those buckles 30 years. They were as familiar to me in my boyhood days as the buttons upon my coat. He gave them to my brother John, who has passed them down to his son John, a young man of 18 years. And this is found in page 9. Do you realize that? It seems like embryonically in that ship was already the Advent movement. James White is one of the founders of the Adventist movement, and he was a direct descendant of that Peregrine White. So it seems like when God saw that in Europe the way was closed for religious freedom, he prepared a way for the Advent message to begin, and it had to be a new way, a new land. And he brought people to the United States so that they could have freedom of religion and follow the dictates of their own conscience. But at the same time, there was a spirit of intolerance that happened in America. In Great Controversy, page 292, she says, "It was the desire for liberty of conscience that inspired the pilgrims to brave the perils of the long journey across the sea, to endure the hardships and dangers of the wilderness, and with God's blessing to lay on the shores of America the foundation of a mighty nation. Yet honest and God-fearing as they were, the pilgrims did not yet comprehend the great principle of religious liberty. The freedom which they sacrificed so much to secure for themselves, they were not equally ready to grant to others. Very few even of the foremost thinkers and moralists of the 17th century had any just conception of that grand principle, the outgrowth of the New Testament, which acknowledges God as the sole judge of human faith. The doctrine that God has committed to the Church the right to control the conscience and to define and punish heresy is one of the most deeply rooted of papal errors. While the Reformers rejected the Creed of Rome, they were not entirely free from her spirit of intolerance. That's scary, because they were called Reformers, and they reformed in many respects, but one of the most dangerous ones was not done away with. They didn't relinquish that one. They kept attached to it. And she says, the dense darkness in which through the long ages of her rule, popery had enveloped all Christendom, had not even yet been wholly dissipated. Said one of the leading ministers in the colony of Massachusetts, "It was toleration that made the world anti-Christian, and the Church never took harm by the punishment of heretics." The regulation was adopted by the colonists that only church members should have a voice in the civil government. A kind of state church was formed, all the people being required to contribute to the support of the clergy, and the magistrates being authorized to suppress heresy. Thus the secular power was in the hands of the Church. It was not long before these measures led to the inevitable result, persecution. Think about this. What is wrong with all the people paying out of their tax money for the support of the clergy? What is wrong with that? Well, the first question is to the support of which clergy, right? Because there are so many churches. So which one is to be supported by my tax money? And the answer is, if there is a state church, it should be the state church. So you already see a big problem. What if I don't believe in that church? And what if I think that that church is wholly wrong? Why should I be obliged to support it? So what's the problem of people then paying money to contribute to the clergy? The problem is the clergy would be of most likely a church that some people won't agree with, unless everybody in that state believes in that same church. So people should not be forced to contribute to the clergy by the state. They should willingly give to the clergy or to the church, to the support of their church, whatever they want to give, but not forced. And when the secular power is in the hand of the church, the result, as described in Great Controversy, the inevitable result is persecution. All through the ages, from the establishment of the papacy, from when it first united with the state in the time of Constantine, the Roman Church always incurred in persecution. Always. In one way or the other. If she had the power of the state to use, like armies, she would use the armies. If she didn't, she would use church power, like calling the whole state into interdict, or the whole country into interdict. That means a lot of the religious ceremonies were halted. People were buried not in the consecrated burial places. The mass was interrupted, and for a superstitious people, that would be a nightmare. So they would do whatever was needed to have the pontiff of Rome revoke the sentence of interdict. Even if needed, they would take down their king to do that, if the king was the so-called problem. So, although the Pilgrim Fathers escaped from intolerance, they kept intolerance in America. The Quakers suffered a lot, but one of those that most suffered was the Baptists, or as they called them, the Anabaptists. They were really persecuted. There was martyrdom in the United States. So one of the first persons to understand the principle of religious freedom and of the Constitution of the United States, which means freedom of religion and of the state, civil freedom, civil and religious freedom. One of the first persons that understood that was Roger Williams. So we'll read a couple of paragraphs here that describe how he came to that. So Roger Williams was respected and beloved as a faithful minister, a man of rare gifts, of unbending integrity and true benevolence. Yet his steadfast denial of the right of civil magistrates to authority over the church and his demand for religious liberty could not be tolerated. The application of this new doctrine, it was urged, would subvert the fundamental state and government of the country. He was sentenced to banishment from the colonies, and finally, to avoid arrest, he was forced to flee amid the cold and storms of winter into the unbroken forest. For 14 weeks, he says, I was sorely tossed in a bitter season, not knowing what bread or bed did mean. But the ravens fed me in the wilderness, and a hollow tree often served him for a shelter. Thus he continued his painful flight through the snow and the trackless forest until he found refuge with an Indian tribe whose confidence and affection he had won while endeavoring to teach them the truths of the gospel. Making his way at last, after months of change and wandering, to the shores of Narragansett Bay, he there laid the foundation of the first state of modern times that in the fullest sense recognized the right of religious freedom. The fundamental principle of Roger Williams' colony was that every man should have liberty to worship God according to the light of his own conscience. His little state, Rhode Island, became the asylum of the oppressed, and it increased and prospered until its foundation principles, civil and religious liberty, became the cornerstones of the American Republic. Did you know that when the Constitution of the United States was framed, they incorporated the principles that he had in his state? In that grand old document, which our forefathers set forth as their Bill of Rights, the Declaration of Independence, they declared, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." And the Constitution guarantees in the most explicit terms the inviolability of conscience. No religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any office or public trust under the United States. And it also says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Did you know that this is the First Amendment? When they framed the Constitution, they put there what they found out at that time. But a few days later, they came up with a Bill of Rights that was added to the Constitution. So the First Amendment, in that first thing that they wanted to add to the Constitution, they mentioned that Congress should make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So she continues in great controversy, quoting actually from a congressional document. She says, "The framers of the Constitution recognized the eternal principle that man's relation with his God is above human legislation, and his rights of conscience inalienable. Reasoning was not necessary to establish this truth. We are conscious of it in our own bosoms. It is this consciousness which, in defiance of human laws, has sustained so many martyrs in tortures and flames. They felt that their duty to God was superior to human enactments, and that men could exercise no authority over their consciences. It is an inborn principle which nothing can eradicate." So let's look at the principles. Let's compare them. So the papacy and the United States are very different in what they believe about freedom of conscience. Pope Pius IX, in his encyclical letter of August 15, 1854, said the following: "The absurd and erroneous doctrines or ravings in defense of liberty of conscience are a most pestilential error, a pest of all others most to be dreaded in a state." What did he say? What did he call liberty of conscience? A pestilential error. It's a pest. Something that infests and spreads, right? It's something that you want to destroy. So he's calling liberty of conscience something that should be dreaded in a state. Isn't that shocking? The same Pope, in the encyclical letter of December 8, 1864, anathemized those who assert the liberty of conscience and of religious worship, and also all such as maintain that the church may not employ force. And we know what that means. I mean, it's all through history. Just look at the history of the papacy and see what she did with the idea of the church having the right to employ force. So there's an anathema upon those who believe that you should have liberty of conscience and of religious worship. An anathema put upon people by the papacy. Not by the Lord of glory, not by God himself, but by this so-called representative of God. But he's not representative of the God of heaven, at least. He may be representative of some other people, but not of the God of heaven. Okay, the principles of the United States of America are very different from that of the papacy. In Roger Williams' colony, he said that every man should have liberty to worship God according to the light of his own conscience. Do you see the difference? On the right side, it's saying, yes, you have freedom of conscience. Worship God according to what you believe is right. On the left side, you see the Pope saying, this is an erroneous doctrine. It's a pestilential error. It just can't go together. To me, it's amazing that the United States and Rome are uniting themselves even more, because the principles are so contradictory. Another principle here in the United States: no religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any office or public trust under the United States. And then, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So, in order for the United States and Rome to be united, to fully unite in the sense of defending Sunday as a rest day, the Constitution will have to be changed or canceled or denied, because Rome will not change her tenets. She claims to be infallible. So the United States will be the one that will change. And this will bring about an amazing wave of persecution to all those who believe in freedom of conscience. Look at what is said about the tone of Rome, how she is tolerant now. You know, there are people that say, oh, the church has changed. You know, the persecution that happened in the previous centuries was just a result of that day. It was a result of the harshness and maybe the lack of knowledge they have. But Rome has changed, and now she is, you know, a different church. She will never repeat those things again. But the church claims to be infallible. And look what Bishop O'Connor says. In Great Controversy, Ellen White quotes a couple sentences there. And she begins by saying herself, the pacific tone of Rome in the United States does not imply a change of heart. She is tolerant where she is helpless. Says Bishop O'Connor, religious liberty is merely endured until the opposite can be carried into effect without peril to the Catholic world. The Archbishop of St. Louis once said, heresy and unbelief are crimes, and in Christian countries, as in Italy and Spain, for instance, where all the people are Catholics and where the Catholic religion is an essential part of the law of the land, they are punished as other crimes. Did she change? He is just saying that until the church can do something and yet be protected, she won't use, persecution. But if she could, and she will be protected from by the state, then she can carry the religious intoleration and persecution and remove the right of conscience from the people, or else they will have to suffer, right? So we come to this. This happened in 2015. And, the Pope had come to America many times. But this was conspicuous because he not only came to America, he was received as the head of a state, or even more. America doesn't do that for other religious leaders, but it did for the Pope. And then, besides that, he went to Congress. The same Congress that established the Constitution. So back then, they understood what Rome was. And they would be shocked to see how the representative of Rome, of intolerance, was received in today's Congress, right? In the Congress from our time. And I was shocked as well. And it was even more shocking to me when, in order to clear the guilt of the Church of Rome, the Pope mentioned that it's very hard to judge people by the actions done in the past. And then he mentions the way America treated the Native Americans in here. So he cast blame upon the United States in order to free the Roman Church of all the persecution that she did, of all that guilt. He said, it's just very hard to cast blame upon people for past actions. But the United States did not do what Rome did. They didn't flay people. They didn't torture them, burnt them at the stake. It was very different. The two things cannot be compared. So there is a duty that devolves upon us. Our duty is to cry aloud, not keep silent. The Bible talks about when the watchman sees that the sword is coming, that he should give the trumpet a certain sound. Otherwise, God will ask of him the blood of those that died because of his lack of sounding the trumpet. So in Last Day Events, page 127, we read, "Let not the commandment-keeping people of God be silent at this time, as though they gracefully accepted the situation. As faithful watchmen, you should see the sword coming and give the warning that men and women may not pursue a course through ignorance that they would avoid if they knew the truth." The whole context here that she's speaking about is the Sunday law that is coming. She says, "I do hope that the trumpet will give a certain sound in regard to this Sunday law movement. I think that it would be best if in our papers the subject of the perpetuity of the law of God were made a specialty. We should now be doing our very best to defeat the Sunday law." What is our duty? Are we to wait in calm expectancy of the event? Not at all. We should be doing our duty to defeat. How are we going to defeat? She says, to enlighten the people. So we need to enlighten our fellow citizens and our friends and all people in America, to let them know what happens if they give up on freedom of religion. What will be the result? What will be the result of uniting with the Roman Church? We are told already that when the union of Romanism and apostate Protestantism will happen in America, the persecution that happened in the past centuries will be more than matched. So you can expect worse things to happen than happened throughout the ages in America. There is a scary future, but we know that God will protect us. However, we need to be preparing and enlightening other people. Check out this website, see the content there. There are sections there that will help to understand the separation of church and state, why it is so important. And there are some audio materials. There's a book in there called The National Sunday Law. That book is the argument that A.T. Jones made in Congress against the Sunday Law in 1888. There was a Sunday law being passed. It was proposed by Senator Henry Blair from Connecticut, and it almost passed. God used A.T. Jones there to make an argument against that bill, that proposed bill, and it didn't pass. So the whole book is there. You can read, you can listen, and you can be a Protestant. They are planning to announce the end of Protestantism. Is that so? Have you heard of that? But Protestantism is not dead. The principles are still present. Many Protestants may have left being Protestant, but there will always be some that will remain. And I just hope that I will remain and you will remain, and we will understand what the true spirit of Protestantism is, and will not relinquish it.